Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stepped off the transport shuttle onto the metal platform of Kepler Station. The artificial gravity felt slightly off compared to Earth's pull, making his stomach lurch with each step. Around him, dozens of other recruits from various human colonies shuffled forward, their faces showing the same mixture of excitement and nervousness that he felt churning in his gut. The Galactic Defense Academy had accepted only 300 humans this cycle out of nearly 50,000 applicants. Marcus still couldn't believe his acceptance letter was real. Growing up on a frontier mining colony where the most dangerous thing was a malfunctioning or processor, he never imagined he'd be standing on an alien space station preparing for combat training alongside beings from across the galaxy.
"Welcome to Hell Week," announced Commander Vex, a towering Altarian with blue-scaled skin and eyes like molten silver.
His voice carried through the docking bay without amplification, a trait that immediately reminded Marcus why Altarians were feared throughout the galaxy as natural warriors. "You have been selected from your respective species to represent your worlds in the most elite military training program in known space." Marcus glanced around at his fellow recruits. There were the obvious powerhouses, 3 Corvan warriors whose rocky, mineral-based skin looked like living armor, a pair of Zenthari whose 6 arms and lightning-fast reflexes were legendary across the galaxy. Then, there were species he didn't recognize, creatures with tentacles instead of limbs, beings that seemed to be made of crystallized energy, and others that defied easy description. Among the crowd of aliens, Marcus spotted maybe 20 other humans scattered throughout the group. They all had the same slightly overwhelmed expression he figured he was wearing. None of them looked particularly impressive compared to the other species represented. Humans were still relatively new to galactic society, having only made first contact 30 years ago. Most alien species viewed them as primitive curiosities rather than serious military candidates. "Your first lesson begins now," Commander Vex continued, his silver eyes scanning the crowd with predatory intensity. "Survival in real combat situations requires more than physical strength or advanced technology. It requires adaptability, intelligence, and the ability to function under extreme stress." The commander gestured toward a series of stations set up around the bay. Each station appeared to contain different types of equipment, weapons, and what looked like various alien creatures in containment units. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he realized this wasn't going to be a standard orientation lecture. "You will rotate through 12 survival scenarios over the next 6 hours, Commander Vex announced. Each scenario is designed to test your species' natural abilities and limitations. Those who fail 3 or more scenarios will be eliminated from the program immediately." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Marcus swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. He'd trained for years to get here, but, looking at the alien beings around him, he wondered if humans were simply outclassed before they even started. "Station assignments are based on your species' compatibility ratings," the commander continued. "Humans will begin at Station 7, Toxin Resistance and Treatment." Marcus found himself grouped with the other humans as they made their way across the bay. Leading their group was Dr. Kethera, a reptilian saurian whose species were known throughout the galaxy as master biologists and medical researchers. Her scaled hands moved with precise, clinical efficiency as she prepared the station equipment. "Humans," she said, her voice carrying a slight hiss that made Marcus's skin crawl. "Your species has an interesting reputation. Your homeworld is supposedly filled with creatures that would kill most galactic citizens within minutes. Yet your own biology appears relatively fragile compared to other sapient species." She activated a holographic display showing various alien creatures. Marcus recognized none of them, but each one looked more terrifying than the last. Creatures with venomous spines, others with acidic saliva, and some that seemed to be made entirely of toxic substances. "Today we test whether human adaptability extends to toxin resistance," Dr. Kethera explained. "Each of you will be exposed to a series of alien venoms and toxins in controlled doses. Your job is to identify the correct treatment protocol and administer it before the toxin overwhelms your system." She picked up a small, crystalline creature that looked like a cross between a spider and a jellyfish. Its translucent body pulsed with an ominous purple glow, and Marcus could see venom sacs clearly visible through its skin. "This is a Nexus stinger," Dr. Kethera said, holding the creature with specialized tongues. native to the poison moons of the Vega system.
A single sting contains enough neurotoxin to kill most galactic species within 10 seconds.
The venom attacks the nervous system directly, causing complete paralysis followed by respiratory failure.
Marcus felt his stomach drop.
Around him, the other humans shifted uncomfortably. This was clearly not what any of them had expected for their first day.
The antidote must be administered within 8 seconds of exposure, the doctor continued.
However, there are 12 different antidotes available, and only one will work.
Choose incorrectly, and the wrong antidote will accelerate the venom's effects.
She gestured to a table lined with various injectors, each containing a different colored serum.
You must identify the correct antidote based on symptom observation and administer it properly. Who volunteers to go first?
The silence stretched uncomfortably.
Marcus looked around at his fellow humans.
There was Sarah Kim from the Luna colonies, built like a marathon runner with sharp, intelligent eyes. Next to her stood Dmitry Volkov from the Europa mining stations, a mountain of a man whose hands looked like they could crush steel. The others were equally impressive in their own ways, but no one seemed eager to volunteer for potential death by alien venom. "I'll do it," Marcus heard himself say, his voice sounding strange in his own ears. Dr. Cathera's reptilian features shifted in what might have been surprise.
"You understand the risks, human? This is not a simulation.
The venom is real, and, if you choose incorrectly, the medical team may not be able to save you."
Marcus nodded, trying to project more confidence than he felt. "I understand. Very well."
She gestured for him to approach the table.
"Extend your arm." Marcus rolled up his sleeve and placed his arm on the designated platform.
The other humans gathered around, their faces tense with anticipation. From across the bay, he noticed that other species had stopped their own exercises to watch. Word was spreading that a human was about to face the Nexus Stinger challenge. Dr. Cathera prepared the crystalline creature, its purple glow intensifying as if it sensed what was coming.
"The moment you are stung, the timer begins. 8 seconds to identify symptoms, choose the correct antidote, and inject yourself. Are you ready?"
Marcus took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He thought about his childhood on the mining colony, where his grandmother had taught him about Earth's dangerous creatures. She'd always said that the key to surviving dangerous situations wasn't being fearless, it was being observant and thinking clearly under pressure.
"Ready," he said. The Nexus Stinger struck faster than Marcus could see.
One moment Dr. Cathera was holding it above his arm, the next he felt a sharp, burning pain like liquid fire shooting up his forearm. The creature's crystalline body pulsed brighter for a moment before the doctor quickly contained it again. Immediately, Marcus felt his vision start to blur around the edges. The burning sensation spread from his arm toward his shoulder, and he could feel his heartbeat becoming irregular. His fingers began to tingle, and, when he tried to flex them, the response was sluggish.
5 seconds remaining, Dr. Cathera announced clinically.
Marcus forced himself to focus despite the growing fog in his mind. The symptoms were classic neurotoxin effects, vision impairment, motor function disruption, cardiovascular irregularities. But there was something else. The burning sensation wasn't just pain, it felt almost alkaline, like the time he'd accidentally splashed mining acid on his hand as a child.
3 seconds.
His hand shaking, Marcus reached for one of the injectors, a bright yellow serum that his instincts told him was wrong.
Too obvious.
Instead, he grabbed a clear injector that looked almost like water.
Something about neutralizing an alkaline toxin with something neutral. 2 seconds.
He slammed the injector against his thigh and triggered the mechanism. The serum flooded into his system just as his knees started to buckle.
1 second.
Marcus collapsed onto the platform, his vision going completely black. Around him, he could hear voices shouting, but they seemed to be coming from very far away. His heart hammered irregularly in his chest, and, for a moment he was certain he had chosen wrong and was about to die on his first day at the academy. Then, gradually, feeling began to return to his extremities. His vision cleared slowly, like fog lifting from a lake. When he could finally focus properly, he found Dr. Kethara staring down at him with an expression he couldn't read. "Remarkable," she said quietly. "You chose correctly." Marcus struggled to sit up, his body still shaky from the experience. Around him, the other humans were cheering and clapping, but he noticed that the alien observers seemed more puzzled than impressed. "How did you know?" asked Sarah Kim, helping him to his feet. "There were 12 choices and almost no time to think." Marcus rubbed his arm where the sting had occurred. The burning sensation had faded to a dull ache, but he could still feel the echo of the venom's effects in his system. It felt familiar, somehow. Like when I was a kid and got stung by razor wasps back on the colony. Dr. Kethara tilted her head, a gesture that looked oddly reptilian. "Razor wasps? I am not familiar with this creature." "They're native to my homeworld," Marcus explained. "Really aggressive insects about the size of your thumb. Their sting causes similar symptoms: vision problems, muscle weakness, irregular heartbeat. But the pain has this distinct alkaline quality. My grandmother always treated razor wasp stings with neutral pH compounds." "Interesting," the doctor mused. "The Nexus stinger's venom does indeed have a highly alkaline composition. Most species experience only the neurotoxic effects. You perceive the chemical nature of the toxin itself." She made some notes on her datapad, her scaled fingers moving rapidly. "This suggests your species may have more refined toxin detection capabilities than our initial assessments indicated." Marcus shrugged, still feeling unsteady on his feet. Back home, being able to tell the difference between different types of venoms and toxins is pretty important for survival. "We've got a lot of dangerous stuff on Earth." "So we are beginning to understand," Dr. Kethara said. "Who would like to attempt the next challenge?" As the other humans took their turns with various toxin scenarios, Marcus found himself thinking about his grandmother's old stories. She used to tell him about Earth's incredible biological diversity, about creatures so venomous they could kill dozens of people with a single bite, plants that could cause excruciating death just from being touched, and environments so hostile that they'd kill most lifeforms in minutes. At the time, he'd always assumed she was exaggerating. Earth seemed dangerous enough without making it sound like a death world. But, watching his fellow humans successfully navigate challenges that were clearly designed to be extremely difficult for most galactic species, he began to wonder if maybe his grandmother's stories weren't exaggerations after all. Sarah Kim successfully identified and treated a paralytic toxin that would have killed most beings in under a minute. Dmitry Volkov shrugged off a neurotoxin dose that should have left him unconscious for hours. One by one, the humans at the station were passing tests that Dr. Kethara clearly expected them to fail. "Most unusual," the doctor muttered as she recorded the results. "In 30 years of conducting these assessments, I have never seen a species with such broad-spectrum toxin resistance. Your success rate is unprecedented." As they moved to the next station, Marcus caught sight of Commander Vex watching them from across the bay. The Altarian commander's expression was unreadable, but Marcus got the distinct impression that they had caught his attention in a way that was both good and potentially problematic. The next station was operated by a massive Corvan warrior whose rock-like skin looked like it had been carved from granite. His species were known for their incredible physical strength and durability, making them natural choices for heavy combat roles. "Physical endurance trial," the Corvan announced in a voice like grinding stone. "Your species will be tested for pain tolerance, physical durability, and recovery time from injury." He gestured to what looked like a medieval torture device, a platform covered with various types of spikes, edges, and pressure points. "Standard protocol: 30 minutes of continuous physical stress while maintaining combat readiness. Most species manage between 5 and 10 minutes before requiring medical intervention." Marcus exchanged glances with his fellow humans. After the toxin station, they were all feeling more confident, but this looked like a completely different type of challenge. The Corvan's rocky skin could probably shrug off most of what this device could dish out, but human skin was notoriously fragile compared to most galactic species. "I'll go first this time," said Dmitry, stepping forward with the kind of grim determination Marcus had seen in veteran miners back home.
The big Russian climbed onto the platform and immediately grimaced as dozens of metal points pressed into his skin.
The Corvin activated the machine, and Marcus watched in amazement as Dmitri simply gritted his teeth and endured pressures and impacts that looked like they should have been sending him to the medical bay. Fascinating, the Corvin instructor rumbled after Dmitri had lasted the full 30 minutes. Your pain tolerance exceeds that of most warrior species. How is this possible for such a soft-skinned being? Dmitri climbed down from the platform, his skin marked but not seriously injured.
Back on Europa, we work 14-hour shifts in mining gear that weighs more than most people. If you can't handle discomfort, you don't eat. As each human took their turn, similar patterns emerged.
They were consistently outperforming expectations, not through superior physical capabilities, but through what seemed to be an unusual tolerance for adverse conditions. When it was Marcus's turn, he found the experience uncomfortable but manageable. The pain was sharp and persistent, but not worse than some of the injuries he'd sustained during mining accidents or encounters with dangerous wildlife. As he endured the 30 minutes, he found his mind wandering to his grandmother's stories again. She'd always talked about how humans had evolved on a world where survival required constant adaptation to hostile conditions. Weather that could kill you in minutes, predators that could track you for days, diseases that could wipe out entire populations. According to her, humans had become so good at surviving dangerous situations that they'd forgotten how dangerous their own world really was.
After the endurance trial, they moved through stations testing reflexes, problem-solving under stress, and tactical thinking.
At each station, the human group consistently performed better than expected, often surpassing species that were supposed to have natural advantages in those areas. By the end of the 6-hour session, word had spread throughout the station. Groups of alien recruits and instructors had gathered to watch the humans complete their final challenges. The atmosphere had shifted from casual observation to something approaching scientific fascination.
Commander Vex called the entire group back to the main assembly area.
His silver eyes swept over the crowd of recruits, but Marcus noticed his gaze lingering on the human contingent longer than the others.
Today's results have been illuminating, the commander said. Several species have demonstrated capabilities that exceed our initial assessments. However, one group's performance has been particularly noteworthy. He activated a holographic display showing performance statistics from each station.
The human results stood out dramatically not because they were the highest in any single category, but because they were consistently above average across every single test. The human delegation, Commander Vex continued, achieved a 95% pass rate across all scenarios.
This is the highest composite score recorded in the Academy's history.
A murmur rippled through the crowd of aliens. Marcus caught several expressions that ranged from surprise to something approaching concern.
These results raise interesting questions about human biology and adaptation, the commander said. Questions that we will be exploring further during your training here.
As the assembly broke up, Marcus found himself surrounded by curious alien recruits asking questions about Earth and human capabilities. Most of the questions were friendly, but he couldn't shake the feeling that their unexpected success had painted targets on their backs. Later, as the human group gathered in their assigned quarters, Sarah Kim voiced what they were all thinking. Did anyone else get the feeling we just made ourselves very popular and very unpopular at the same time? She asked. Marcus nodded, thinking about the mixture of fascination and wariness he'd seen in the alien observers. My grandmother used to say that humans were lucky most of the galaxy didn't know how dangerous Earth really was.
I'm starting to think she might have been right.
Outside their quarters, the lights of Kepler Station glittered against the backdrop of space. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove themselves. But tonight, Marcus couldn't escape the feeling that their performance had started something that would ripple far beyond the walls of the Academy.
The question was whether that something would work in their favor or against them.
3 weeks into training at Kepler Station, Marcus had learned to recognize the different ways alien species expressed suspicion. The Corvin warriors' rocky features would shift into harder angles.
The Zenthuri's multiple eyes would focus on him with predatory intensity.
The Crystal and Vector would literally dim their internal light when he approached. It wasn't hostility exactly, but it wasn't friendship either. The humans' continued success in training exercises had created an atmosphere of watchful uncertainty that followed them wherever they went on the station. This morning felt different, though. Instead of their usual mixed species training groups, all the humans had been called to a special briefing in Conference Room 7. As Marcus entered the sterile, white-walled space, he found his fellow human recruits already seated around a circular table. Their instructor for today was someone new, a tall, thin being with pale gray skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "I am Professor Zethkol," the being announced in a voice that reminded Marcus of wind through empty corridors.
"I represent the Academy's Xenobiology Research Division.
You may consider today's session both a lesson and an evaluation." Marcus exchanged glances with Sarah Kim, who was seated across from him. Her expression mirrored his own unease. Evaluations at the Academy had a way of being dangerous, and special evaluations involving research divisions were usually worse. "Your performance over the past 3 weeks has attracted considerable attention," Professor Zethkol continued, activating a holographic display that showed various biological charts and data streams. "Your species consistently demonstrates capabilities that our models did not predict. This suggests either significant gaps in our understanding of human biology, or..." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Or what?" asked Dmitri, his Russian accent making the question sound more like a challenge than genuine curiosity. "Or your species has been deliberately understating its capabilities," Professor Zethkol replied smoothly. "Today we will determine which possibility is accurate." The holographic display shifted to show what looked like a laboratory setup. In the center was a sealed chamber containing various alien creatures, all of them clearly aggressive and venomous. Around the chamber were workstations equipped with analysis equipment, medical supplies, and what Marcus assumed were recording devices. "The test is simple," the professor explained. "Each of you will enter the chamber for exactly 10 minutes. During that time, you will be exposed to 5 different alien species, each one carrying toxins that are lethal to most galactic lifeforms. Your task is to survive, identify the threats, and develop countermeasures using only the resources available in the chamber." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. This was far beyond anything they'd faced in training so far. Those had been controlled exposures to small amounts of venom with antidotes readily available. This sounded like being thrown into a pit with actual predators. "What if we refuse?" asked Chinwei, one of the quieter humans in their group. Professor Zethkol's large eyes fixed on him with unsettling intensity. "Refusal results in immediate dismissal from the Academy and return to your homeworld. However, you should know that this test has been approved by your species representatives. According to Earth's diplomatic mission, humans should find this challenge manageable." Marcus frowned. Earth's diplomatic mission had been established only a few years ago, and it was staffed mainly by politicians and scientists who had never left Earth's orbital stations. How would they know what humans could or couldn't handle in a situation like this? Furthermore, the professor continued, preliminary scans of your homeworld suggest that Earth's biosphere contains similar threats. We are simply providing you with an opportunity to demonstrate adaptation skills that you should already possess. The implication was clear. If humans really came from the kind of dangerous world their files suggested, this test should be routine. If they couldn't handle it, then either Earth wasn't as dangerous as claimed, or humans weren't as adapted to danger as they appeared to be. I'll go first, Marcus said, standing up before he could talk himself out of it. Professor Zethkol nodded as if he'd expected this. Very well. Please follow me to the preparation area. The preparation area turned out to be a small chamber adjacent to the test environment. Through a transparent barrier, Marcus could see the creatures he'd be facing. They were unlike anything from Earth's ecosystem, but somehow familiar in their obvious lethality. The first was something that looked like a cross between a snake and a centipede, with dozens of legs ending in venomous claws. It moved with liquid grace across the floor of the chamber, leaving small scorch marks where its feet touched the metal. The second creature resembled a flowering plant, but, as Marcus watched, it snapped at the air with petals lined with needle-sharp teeth. Where its roots touched the chamber walls, the metal began to corrode and bubble. The third was harder to categorize, a blob of translucent gel that shifted and flowed across surfaces, leaving a trail of what looked like acid. Every few seconds, it would pulse with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. The fourth creature was clearly aerial, something like a jellyfish that floated through the air, trailing long, gossamer threads that sparked with electrical discharge. As Marcus watched, one of its tendrils brushed against the chamber wall and left a smoking crater in the metal. The fifth and largest creature was obviously the apex predator of the group. It looked like someone had crossed a spider with a tiger, resulting in something with 8 legs, retractable claws, and, for that seemed to shift color depending on the angle of view. Its multiple eyes tracked movement with predatory intelligence, and Marcus could see venom dripping from fangs that were easily as long as his fingers. The chamber contains standard analysis equipment, basic medical supplies, and raw materials that can be fashioned into tools or countermeasures, Professor Zethkol explained.
You have 10 minutes from the moment you enter. The creatures will be released 30 seconds after entry, giving you time to orient yourself. Marcus nodded, trying to keep his breathing steady.
This was definitely not what he'd signed up for when he applied to the academy, but backing down now would mean not only his own dismissal but potentially affecting how the galactic community viewed all humans.
One final note, the professor added as Marcus prepared to enter the chamber. The creatures you will face are not native to any single world. They have been collected from the most dangerous biospheres in known space. Most academy instructors would not voluntarily enter this chamber even with full protective gear. The chamber door slid open with a soft hiss. Marcus stepped inside, immediately noting the stale, recycled air and the faint chemical smell that suggested the presence of toxins. The chamber was roughly circular, about 10 meters across, with workstations positioned around the perimeter and the center left open as what he assumed would be the main conflict zone. Behind him, the door sealed with a definitive clang. Through the observation windows, he could see his fellow humans watching with tense expressions, while Professor Zethkol monitored various instruments and displays. Marcus had 30 seconds to prepare. He moved quickly to the nearest workstation, scanning the available equipment. There were chemical analysis devices, basic laboratory glassware, medical scanners, and what looked like components for improvising protective gear or weapons. Most importantly, he spotted several containers of different chemical compounds, some clearly labeled as neutralizing agents, others as raw materials for synthesis. 20 seconds. He grabbed a portable scanner and quickly swept the chamber, trying to get baseline readings on environmental conditions. The air showed elevated levels of several compounds he didn't recognize, but nothing immediately lethal. The chamber's filtration system was apparently designed to prevent the most dangerous atmospheric toxins from accumulating. 10 seconds. Marcus positioned himself near the center of the chamber, scanner in one hand and a chemical neutralizer spray in the other. Around the perimeter, he could see sealed compartments beginning to iris open. 5 seconds. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory, when you're facing something dangerous, don't think about how scared you are. Think about what it wants and how to avoid giving it that. 0. The creatures emerged simultaneously from multiple points around the chamber. Marcus's first instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to go in the enclosed space. Instead, he forced himself to stay calm and observe their behavior patterns. The snake centipede thing immediately began searching for prey, its multiple legs carrying it in a rapid spiral pattern around the chamber's perimeter. The plant creature remained relatively stationary but snapped aggressively at anything that came within a meter of its position. The gel blob moved slowly but purposefully toward the center of the chamber, toward him. The floating jellyfish creature drifted overhead, its electrical tendrils probing downward like fishing lines. And the spider tiger stalked around the edge of the space, clearly intelligent enough to assess the situation before committing to an attack. Marcus's scanner was picking up massive amounts of data about the various toxins and electrical fields, but he didn't have time to analyze it properly. The gel blob was getting closer, and he could see that the floor was beginning to smoke where it had passed. Drawing on childhood memories of dealing with aggressive wildlife, Marcus grabbed a metal rod from one of the workstations and began making noise, striking the rod against the chamber wall in a steady rhythm. On Earth, many predators were territorial and could be confused or deterred by unfamiliar sounds. the effect was immediate. The snake centipede paused in its spiral hunt, its front legs rising as it tried to locate the source of the sound. The spider tiger stopped stalking and focused its multiple eyes on Marcus with obvious intelligence. More importantly, the gel blob slowed its approach. Marcus's scanner indicated that it was highly sensitive to vibrations, using them to navigate and hunt. The rhythmic striking seemed to be interfering with its sensory system. But he couldn't keep making noise forever, and the floating jellyfish was getting closer. Its electrical field was strong enough that Marcus could feel the hair on his arms standing up. Working quickly, Marcus moved to a workstation that contained chemical compounds. His scanner had identified the jellyfish's electrical discharge as being conducted through moisture in the air. If he could temporarily change the humidity or introduce a compound that would interfere with electrical conduction. He grabbed a canister labeled as a desiccant and popped it open. Immediately, the air around him began to dry noticeably. The jellyfish's electrical tendrils flickered and weakened, though they didn't disappear entirely. 3 minutes elapsed. The plant creature had been relatively inactive, but, as Marcus moved around the chamber, it suddenly erupted into violent motion. Its petals spread wide, revealing a maw line with acidic teeth, and it began spitting globules of digestive fluid in his direction. Marcus dove behind a workstation as acid splashed where he'd been standing. The metal surface immediately began to corrode and bubble. His scanner indicated that the plant's acid was powerful enough to dissolve most organic and metallic compounds within seconds. But plants needed specific nutrients to survive, and their digestive systems were usually highly specialized. Marcus grabbed a container of basic alkaline compound and mixed it with water from the emergency supply. If the plant's acid was as powerful as it seemed, introducing a strong base might neutralize it or even damage the creature's system. Using an improvised sling made from equipment straps, Marcus hurled globules of the alkaline solution at the plant. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Where the solution hit the plant's petals, they began to smoke and curl. The creature's aggressive spitting stopped as it seemed to recoil from the chemical burn. 5 minutes elapsed. The snake centipede had resumed hunting and was now moving directly toward Marcus with obvious intent. Its venomous claws left smoking trails on the metal floor, and its speed was incredible. There was no way Marcus could outrun it in the confined space. Instead, he remembered something his grandmother had told him about Earth's centipedes. They were highly sensitive to certain chemical compounds, particularly those that interfered with their nervous systems. But he didn't have time to analyze what might work on an alien variant. Working on instinct, Marcus grabbed a medical scanner and quickly analyzed his own sweat. Humans produced a wide variety of chemical compounds through perspiration, many of them designed to deter insects and other small predators. If this creature had similar vulnerabilities. He smeared his hands with his own sweat and then grabbed a metal tool to use as a weapon. When the snake centipede lunged at him, instead of trying to avoid its claws, he grabbed its front section directly. The creature's reaction was immediate and violent. It writhed and thrashed, trying to escape his grip, but its movements were becoming increasingly uncoordinated. Whatever compounds were in human sweat, they were clearly affecting its nervous system. Within seconds, the creature had collapsed, its multiple legs twitching irregularly. Marcus's scanner indicated that it was still alive but essentially paralyzed. 7 minutes elapsed. That left the gel blob and the spider tiger. The blob had resumed its approach now that Marcus had stopped making rhythmic noise, and the spider tiger was clearly planning some kind of coordinated attack. Marcus realized that he'd been thinking about this wrong. Instead of trying to neutralize each creature individually, he needed to use them against each other. These were predators from different worlds, they wouldn't have natural coordination, and they might see each other as competition for prey. Grabbing another metal rod, Marcus began striking the floor in a pattern designed to mimic the movement of wounded prey. The spider tiger's predatory instincts kicked in immediately, and it began stalking toward the sound. At the same time, Marcus positioned himself so that the gel blob was between him and the approaching predator. When the spider tiger pounced, it landed directly on the gel creature. The result was chaos.
The gel blob's acidic surface immediately began dissolving the spider tiger's legs, while the spider tiger's claws and fangs tore into the gel creature's membrane. Both creatures became locked in a death struggle that rendered them both unable to focus on Marcus.
9 minutes elapsed. The jellyfish creature was still active, though weakened by the desiccant he'd introduced.
Its electrical field was weaker but still dangerous.
Marcus needed to finish this quickly.
Looking around the chamber, he spotted something he'd missed before, a grounding rod designed for electrical safety. If he could get the jellyfish to discharge into the rod instead of into him. Marcus grabbed the grounding rod and extended it toward the floating creature.
The jellyfish's tendrils immediately reached for the metal, drawn by its electrical conductivity.
The moment they made contact, there was a brilliant flash of light and the smell of ozone. When Marcus's vision cleared, the jellyfish was floating motionless near the chamber ceiling, its bioluminescent patterns dark.
10 minutes. The chamber door opened, and Marcus stumbled out, his legs shaky from adrenaline.
Behind him, the snake centipede was still paralyzed, the plant creature was curled up and smoking from alkaline burns, the gel blob and spider tiger were destroying each other, and the jellyfish was neutralized. Professor Zethkol stared at him with an expression that Marcus couldn't interpret. Around the observation area, other academy staff had gathered, all of them wearing similar looks of surprise and something approaching concern. Fascinating, the professor said quietly, making notes on his datapad. You survived contact with 5 lethal alien species using only improvised countermeasures and basic chemistry. Most remarkable was your apparent intuitive understanding of vulnerabilities that our xenobiology teams have spent years identifying. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead, still breathing hard.
How did I do compared to other species?
Other species do not typically attempt this test, Professor Zethkol replied. It was designed specifically for humans based on analysis of your homeworld's biosphere. Our models suggested that beings from such a dangerous environment should find this challenge manageable.
And
you have confirmed our models in ways that are both impressive and concerning. Before Marcus could ask what that meant, Sarah Kim was called for the next test. As she entered the preparation area, Marcus noticed that additional observers had arrived, including Commander Vex and several beings he didn't recognize wearing official-looking insignia. Word is spreading, Dimitri murmured as he sat down next to Marcus.
Whatever we just proved, it's bigger than just academy training.
Marcus nodded, watching Sarah prepare for her turn in the chamber. Through the observation windows, he could see Professor Zethkol in animated discussion with the newly arrived officials. Their body language suggested surprise, concern, and what looked like heated debate.
One by one, the humans took their turns in the chamber.
Sarah used her marathon runner's endurance to outlast several creatures until they became sluggish from their own toxin production. Dimitri simply tanked through most attacks, his mining colony background having given him resistance to various industrial chemicals that proved effective against alien toxins.
Each success seemed to increase the tension in the observation area.
By the time the last human completed the test, the room was crowded with officials from various species, all of them watching the proceedings with obvious unease.
The test phase is complete, Professor Zethkol announced as the group reassembled.
Results will be compiled and distributed to relevant authorities. You are dismissed to return to normal training schedules. As they left the testing area, Marcus caught fragments of conversation from the observing officials. Words like underestimated, reclassification, and security implications stood out from the mixture of alien languages. That evening, as the human contingent gathered in their common area, Chenwei voiced what they were all thinking.
Does anyone else feel like we just painted huge targets on our backs? He asked. More like we painted targets on all of humanity, Sarah replied grimly. Did you see how many officials showed up? This isn't just about academy training anymore.
Marcus stared out the viewport at the stars beyond the station. His grandmother's stories about Earth being more dangerous than most people realized were starting to seem less like folklore and more like classified intelligence. The question now was what the galactic community planned to do with that information. The emergency assembly alarm echoed through Kepler station at 0300 hours, jerking Marcus awake from uneasy dreams about crystalline creatures and acid-spitting plants. Around him, the other humans in the dormitory were already moving, their military training kicking in despite only being half awake. "This is not a drill," came the announcement over the station's communication system. "All personnel report to Assembly Bay 1 immediately." Repeat, "This is not a drill." Marcus pulled on his uniform and joined the stream of recruits and instructors moving through the station's corridors. The atmosphere was tense in a way he hadn't experienced since arriving at the academy. Emergency assemblies were rare, and middle-of-the-night ones usually meant something had gone very wrong. Assembly Bay 1 was the largest gathering space on the station, capable of holding several thousand beings. As Marcus entered with his fellow humans, he was surprised to see that the bay was nearly full. Not just with academy personnel, but with officials he didn't recognize wearing the insignia of various galactic governments and military organizations. At the front of the assembly area, Commander Vex stood beside a holographic display showing what appeared to be a star map with several systems highlighted in red. Next to him was a being Marcus had never seen before, tall, elegant, with features that suggested both authority and considerable age. "I am High Admiral Kethvar of the Galactic Defense Council," the being announced, his voice carrying easily through the vast space without amplification. "6 hours ago, we received a priority communication from the hegemony worlds in the Outer Rim. The situation requires immediate response, and circumstances have made your participation necessary." The star map zoomed in on one of the red highlighted systems. Marcus could see several planets, space stations, and what looked like a significant military fleet in defensive formation around the primary world. The hegemony colony of Zirian Prime has been invaded by an indigenous species that was previously thought to be extinct, the High Admiral continued. "Initial contact was peaceful, but the situation has deteriorated rapidly. The creatures, designated as Zirian swarm entities, have proven to be highly aggressive, incredibly toxic, and adaptive to most standard countermeasures." The display shifted to show video footage that made Marcus's stomach clench. The creatures attacking the colony looked like something from humanity's worst nightmares, insect-like beings the size of shuttlecraft, with multiple limbs ending in dripping stingers, chitinous armor that seemed to absorb energy weapon fire, and swarm behavior that overwhelmed defensive positions through sheer numbers. "Standard military doctrine has proven ineffective," the High Admiral continued grimly. "Energy weapons are absorbed by their carapaces. Kinetic weapons require direct hits to vital organs that are protected by layers of toxic fluid. Most concerning, exposure to their defensive toxins has proven fatal to all tested species within minutes." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He had a terrible suspicion about where this briefing was heading. Chemical analysis of the toxin samples indicates a complex mixture of neurotoxins, cytotoxins, and metabolic disruptors that attacks multiple biological systems simultaneously, the High Admiral explained. "Our best xenobiologists estimate that developing effective countermeasures would require months of research and testing." The display changed again, showing casualty reports and evacuation statistics. The numbers were staggering, entire colonies being abandoned, military units suffering 90% casualty rates, and evacuation efforts hampered by the creature's apparent ability to track ships through hyperspace. Zirian Prime has a population of 12 million beings representing 47 different species, the High Admiral continued. Complete evacuation is not logistically possible, and the swarm entities have already begun spreading to neighboring systems. We estimate that if this threat is not contained within 72 hours, it could affect the entire Outer Rim sector. Commander Vex stepped forward, his silver eyes scanning the crowd until they fixed on the human contingent. Recent testing has revealed that humans possess unusual resistance to exotic toxins and adaptability to hostile biological threats. Based on these capabilities, the Defense Council has authorized the deployment of human personnel to Zirian Prime. The silence in the assembly bay was absolute. Marcus felt every alien eye in the place turning toward the small group of humans. The weight of attention was almost physical, and he could feel his fellow recruits shifting uncomfortably beside him. "This is a volunteer mission," the High Admiral clarified. "No being will be compelled to participate. However, we must be clear about the stakes. If the Zirian swarm cannot be contained, it could represent the largest threat to galactic civilization in recorded history." Marcus raised his hand. Around him, he could feel the surprise from both humans and aliens at his willingness to speak up in such a formal setting. "Sir," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the silent bay, "what exactly would we be expected to do? We're still in training, and we're talking about creatures that have defeated professional military forces." The High Admiral's expression remained neutral, but Marcus caught something in his eyes that might have been approval for asking direct questions. Intelligence analysis suggests that the swarm entities rely heavily on their toxic defenses because most galactic species cannot approach them closely enough to engage in effective combat, the High Admiral explained. Human toxin resistance appears to be significant enough to allow close-range engagement, potentially enabling tactics that are not available to other species. "You want us to get close to these things and fight them hand-to-hand," Sarah Kim said flatly. "We want you to do what humans apparently do best," Commander Vex replied. "Adapt to hostile biological threats and find ways to survive situations that would kill most other beings." Professor Zethkol stepped forward from among the observers. "The Academy's testing has revealed capabilities that exceed our initial projections by significant margins. Your species demonstrates intuitive understanding of biological threats, rapid adaptation to toxic environments, and problem-solving abilities under extreme stress that are unprecedented." Marcus felt a growing sense of unease. The way the aliens were talking about humans made it sound less like they were being asked to help and more like they were being drafted because of biological characteristics they hadn't asked for. "What about our training?" asked Dmitri. "We've been here less than a month. How are we supposed to handle something that trained military forces couldn't?" "You will not be deploying alone," the High Admiral assured them. "You will be attached to the 47th Galactic Marine Division as specialist advisors. Your role will be to identify biological vulnerabilities and develop countermeasures that can be implemented by regular military forces." The display showed the fleet that would be carrying them to Zirian Prime. The ships were massive, bristling with weapons and defensive systems, and clearly designed for serious military operations rather than training exercises. "Departure is in 6 hours," Commander Vex announced. "Those who volunteer will be given accelerated tactical training during the hyperspace transit. Mission duration is expected to be between 2 and 4 weeks, depending on how quickly effective countermeasures can be developed." Marcus looked around at his fellow humans. Their expressions ranged from terrified to grimly determined, but he didn't see anyone who looked ready to volunteer. The gap between academy training and actual military deployment against an unknown alien threat was enormous. But then, he thought about his grandmother's stories again, and about the 12 million civilians on Zirian Prime who were facing creatures that could kill them with a touch. If humans really did have advantages against biological threats, didn't they have a responsibility to help? "I'll volunteer," Marcus said, standing up. The response was immediate. Every alien in the bay turned to stare at him with expressions ranging from surprise to something that looked like relief. Behind him, he heard Sarah Kim curse quietly in 3 languages. "I'll go too," she said, standing up beside him. One by one, the other humans rose to their feet. Within minutes, all 23 humans in the Academy had volunteered for a mission that would take them into combat against creatures that had defeated professional military forces. The High Admiral nodded gravely. "Your courage is commendable and will be remembered. Report to Transport Base 7 in 5 hours for equipment issue and briefing." Dismissed. As the assembly broke up, Marcus found himself surrounded by alien instructors and officials, all of them wanting to shake his hand or offer what seemed to be traditional good luck gestures from their respective species. The attention was overwhelming and more than a little frightening. "Second thoughts?" Sarah asked as they made their way back to their quarters. "Third and fourth thoughts," Marcus admitted. "But those casualty reports, if we can actually help, we have to try." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Equipment issue involved being fitted with armor systems designed to interface with human biology, weapons training that focused on close-range combat against large, fast-moving targets, and briefings on Zirian swarm behavior patterns based on limited observational data. The most sobering part was the medical briefing. Dr. Cathara, the Saurian xenobiologist who had conducted their first toxin tests, showed them detailed analyses of the swarm creature's defensive toxins. "The complexity is remarkable," she explained. her scaled hands moving over holographic molecular models. The creatures produce at least 47 different toxic compounds simultaneously, including neurotoxins that attack the central nervous system, cytotoxins that destroy cellular structure, and metabolic inhibitors that prevent normal biological functions.
Marcus studied the molecular diagrams.
The toxin mixture was incredibly sophisticated, clearly designed to overwhelm any biological defense system through sheer complexity and multiple attack vectors. Most concerning, Dr. Cathara continued, is evidence that the toxin composition can be modified in real time. Creatures exposed to specific antidotes have been observed changing their chemical output to counter the treatment. So they can adapt faster than we can develop countermeasures, Chenwei said grimly. Conventional countermeasures, yes, the doctor agreed. However, human biology appears to have natural resistance mechanisms that are not easily countered. Your species produces neutralizing compounds spontaneously in response to toxin exposure, and your immune systems show remarkable adaptability to novel threats. As they boarded the transport that would take them to the military fleet, Marcus caught sight of Commander Vex in conversation with several beings he didn't recognize. Their body language suggested intense discussion, and he caught fragments of words that sounded like contingency protocols and classification reviews. The transport docked with the flagship of the 47th Galactic Marine Division, a massive vessel called the Stellar Hammer. As the human contingent was escorted through corridors lined with heavily armed alien marines, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something much larger and more dangerous than anyone had fully explained. Their briefing room was filled with holographic displays showing real-time updates from Zirion Prime. The situation had deteriorated further during their transit to the fleet. Several more colonies had reported swarm incursions, and the creatures appeared to be spreading faster than initial projections had indicated. General Faxmore, the division commander, was a massive Corvan whose rocky skin showed the scars of dozens of previous battles. His voice rumbled like an avalanche when he addressed the human volunteers. "You are not soldiers," he said bluntly. "You are specialists whose biological capabilities may provide advantages that trained military forces do not possess. Your job is to survive contact with these creatures long enough to identify vulnerabilities that can be exploited by conventional forces." The tactical displays showed the swarm creatures in more detail than the initial briefings had provided. Up close, they were even more terrifying. Each one was roughly the size of a small aircraft, with chitinous armor that could deflect most energy weapons, multiple limbs ending in toxic stingers, and sensory organs that allowed them to track prey across vast distances. Intelligence estimates suggest the creatures are not naturally aggressive, General Faxmore explained. Their current behavior patterns indicate they are defending territory or resources from what they perceive as invasion. However, their defensive capabilities are so lethal that the distinction between defense and aggression is largely academic. Marcus raised his hand. "General, if they're defending territory, couldn't we try diplomatic contact instead of military engagement?" The general's rocky features shifted in what might have been approval for the question. "Several attempts have been made. The creatures show signs of intelligence, but they do not respond to any known forms of communication. More critically, their defensive toxin production appears to be involuntary. Even peaceful contact results in lethal exposure." The briefing continued for hours, covering everything from swarm reproduction patterns to planetary geography. By the time it ended, Marcus felt like his head was spinning with information overload. As they prepared to enter hyperspace for the final transit to Zirion Prime, Sarah Kim sat down beside him in the observation lounge. "Any regrets about volunteering?" she asked. Marcus stared out at the stars streaming past as the ship prepared for hyperspace jump. "Ask me again in a few days. Right now, I'm too terrified to think straight." The ship shuddered slightly as it entered hyperspace, and the stars outside disappeared into the swirling tunnel of faster-than-light travel. In less than 12 hours, they would be in the Zirion system, facing creatures that had defeated every military force sent against them. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to remember everything his grandmother had told him about Earth's dangerous wildlife. Somehow, he had the feeling that those old stories were about to become very relevant indeed. The dropship's engines screamed as they punched through Zirion Prime's atmosphere, emergency maneuvers throwing Marcus against his restraints hard enough to bruise. Through the armored viewport, he could see the planet's surface scarred by massive craters and the twisted remains of what had once been thriving colonies. 30 seconds to touchdown, announced Lieutenant Vashti, the Zenthari pilot whose forearms moved across the controls with inhuman precision.
Remember, the landing zone is only temporarily clear. Swarm entities are tracking our approach. Marcus checked his equipment one final time.
The armor they'd given him was lighter than he'd expected, designed more for environmental protection than stopping weapons fire. The weapons package was equally minimal, a basic energy sidearm and what looked like improvised close combat tools. Everything about their loadout suggested that the military didn't expect conventional tactics to work. Beside him, Sarah Kim was running through breathing exercises that she'd learned for marathon running. Dimitri was methodically checking each piece of gear with the kind of obsessive precision that came from working with dangerous mining equipment. The other humans showed various degrees of nervousness, but none of them looked ready to back down.
10 seconds. Brace for impact. The dropship hit the ground hard, its landing thrusters churning up clouds of alien dust.
Before the engines had fully spun down, the rear hatch was dropping and they were moving out onto the surface of Zirian Prime.
Marcus's first impression was of overwhelming heat and humidity.
The air felt thick and organic, like breathing inside a greenhouse. His armor's environmental systems kicked in immediately, filtering the atmosphere and providing cooling. Through his helmet's heads-up display, he could see readouts showing various atmospheric toxins at levels that would have been immediately lethal without protection.
The landing zone was a cleared space in what had once been the outskirts of New Geneva Colony.
Around the perimeter, he could see the remains of defensive positions, melted metal barriers, scorched earth where energy weapons had fired, and ominous dark stains that he tried not to think about too closely.
General Faxmore's massive frame appeared beside the dropship as his own transport touched down.
The Corvin commander's rocky features showed no emotion, but Marcus could sense the tension radiating from him. Initial reconnaissance confirms the creatures are approximately 2 kilometers from this position, the general reported over the communication network. They appear to be holding defensive positions around the colony's main population centers. Intelligence suggests they are protecting something, but we have been unable to determine what.
Marcus looked toward the colony in the distance. Through his helmet's magnification system, he could see movement, dark shapes flowing between buildings with predatory grace.
Occasionally, he caught glimpses of the creature's full size, and each sighting made his stomach clench with fear.
"Sir," he said over the comm, "have we tried approaching without weapons or armor?"
If they're really defensive rather than aggressive, maybe they're responding to perceived threats. The silence that followed his suggestion was long enough to make Marcus wonder if his communication system had malfunctioned. Finally, General Faxmore's voice came back over the network.
3 separate diplomatic teams have attempted non-threatening contact.
All were killed before getting within 500 meters of the creatures.
Their toxin production appears to be constant and involuntary. As if summoned by their conversation, movement erupted from the direction of the colony.
Dark shapes were flowing across the landscape toward their position, not the chaotic charge Marcus had expected, but organized, coordinated movement that spoke of intelligence and tactical planning.
"Contact in approximately 90 seconds, Lieutenant Vashti's voice crackled over the comm. All personnel to defensive positions."
The human contingent found themselves clustered behind hastily erected barriers, their minimal weapons training suddenly, feeling completely inadequate. Around them, professional Marines with years of experience were checking massive energy weapons and setting up defensive fields. "Remember," came Dr. Cathera's voice over the medical channel, "your primary mission is observation and analysis. If you encounter the creatures directly, focus on survival and information gathering rather than engagement."
Marcus peered over the barrier as the first swarm entities came into clear view.
Even at a distance, they were more terrifying than any video footage had suggested. Each creature was roughly the size of a small aircraft, moving on 6 powerful legs that ended in toxic stingers. Their chitinous armor seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and their sensory organs tracked the defensive position with obvious intelligence.
"Energy weapons, commence firing," General Faxmore ordered.
The first volley of energy fire lit up the landscape like artificial lightning. Marcus watched in amazement as the brilliant energy beam struck the approaching creatures and, simply, disappeared. The creatures' armor didn't just absorb the energy, it seemed to channel it into their own systems, making them move faster and, more aggressively.
Kinetic weapons, engage targets, the general commanded.
Massive projectile weapons opened fire, sending streams of metal slugs toward the creatures. Some found their marks, punching through armor and drawing spurts of fluorescent fluid that had to be the creature's equivalent of blood. But the wounds seemed to close almost immediately, and the creatures kept advancing. 50 meters and, closing, someone reported over the calm, defensive fields are showing no effect against their approach. Marcus could smell something now, even through his armor's filtration system. A sweet, chemical odor that made his sinuses burn and his eyes water. The creatures weren't just approaching, they were releasing their toxins into the air as they moved.
All non-essential personnel, fall back to secondary positions, General Thaxmore ordered. Prepare for close contact engagement.
Instead of falling back, Marcus found himself moving forward. It wasn't a conscious decision, something about the creature's behavior pattern was nagging at him, reminding him of wildlife encounters from his childhood on the mining colony.
Marcus, what are you doing?
Sarah's voice came sharply over the calm. Something's wrong with their approach, he replied, moving toward the front of the defensive line.
Look at their formation. They're not attacking, they're hurting us. He was right.
The creatures were advancing in a careful pattern that was designed to push the human forces away from the landing zone and toward a specific direction. It wasn't the behavior of aggressive predators, it was the behavior of defensive animals trying to drive threats away from something they were protecting. All forces, cease fire, Marcus said into his calm, surprising himself with his own boldness. Negative, General Thaxmore's voice boomed back.
You are not authorized to issue tactical orders.
Sir, with respect, we're not being attacked.
We're being herded.
They're trying to push us away from something. The creatures had stopped their advance and were maintaining position about 20 meters from the defensive line. Marcus could see their multiple eyes tracking movement, their toxic stingers weaving hypnotically in the air, but they weren't pressing their attack. Against all training and common sense, Marcus stood up and stepped over the defensive barrier.
Marcus, get back here! Sarah shouted.
The effect on the creatures was immediate. They focused all their attention on him, their sensory organs swiveling to track his movement.
But they didn't attack.
Instead, they began a complex display behavior, raising and lowering their stingers, shifting the colors of their armor, and producing a low harmonic sound that Marcus could feel in his bones. They're trying to communicate, he said over the calm, his voice filled with wonder.
They're preparing to kill you, General Thaxmore replied grimly. Fall back immediately.
Marcus ignored the order and took another step forward. The creatures responded by intensifying their display behavior, but still didn't attack. The sweet chemical smell was getting stronger, but his armor's systems were handling it without apparent difficulty.
Dr. Kethera, he said over the calm, are you monitoring my biological readings?
Yes, came the tense reply. You are being exposed to toxin levels that should have killed you several times over, but your readings remain stable.
This is unprecedented.
Marcus took another step closer to the creatures. They were magnificent up close, their armor was actually a complex biological system that shifted and flowed like living metal, their multiple eyes showed obvious intelligence, and their movements had a grace that spoke of millions of years of evolution.
They're beautiful, he said softly. They're also the most dangerous biological weapons we've ever encountered, General Thaxmore replied. Fall back immediately.
Instead, Marcus sat down on the ground about 10 meters from the nearest creature. It was a calculated risk based on his grandmother's stories about dealing with aggressive wildlife.
Many territorial animals would de-escalate confrontations if potential threats demonstrated non-aggressive behavior.
The effect was remarkable. The creature's aggressive display behavior stopped immediately. They lowered their stingers, settled into resting positions, and continued to watch him with obvious curiosity rather than hostility. Incredible, Dr. Kethera's voice came over the calm. The toxin levels in the air have dropped by 90%.
They appear to have conscious control over their defensive systems.
Marcus activated his helmet's translation software and began speaking in what he hoped was a calm, non-threatening tone. He talked about Earth, about his journey to the academy, about his grandmother's stories of dangerous wildlife. He didn't expect the creatures to understand the words, but hoped they might pick up on the emotional content. After several minutes, one of the creatures began responding. The sounds it made were unlike anything Marcus had heard before, complex harmonics that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to some deeper part of his brain. But, somehow, meaning began to emerge from the alien communication. Images flooded his mind, not words, but direct conceptual transfer. He saw the creature's homeworld before the human colonies arrived, a lush ecosystem where they lived in harmony with other species. He saw their perspective on the colonists' arrival, confusion at the sudden appearance of beings who seemed to die simply from being near them. "They don't understand why we're so fragile," Marcus said over the calm, his voice filled with amazement. "They've been trying to help, not harm. Their toxins are defensive responses to what they perceive as threats, but they can't understand why we keep dying even when they try to be gentle." More images flowed through the mental connection. The creatures' attempts to move away from human settlements, their confusion when military forces arrived, their desperate efforts to communicate that led to even more deaths as their stress responses increased toxin production. "General," Marcus said, his voice urgent with new understanding, "we need to completely change our approach. These aren't weapons or monsters. They're refugees who have been traumatized by misunderstanding." The mental connection intensified, and, suddenly, Marcus could feel the creature's emotions directly. Fear, confusion, grief for the deaths they had caused without intending harm, and desperate hope that finally, someone might understand them. "Dr. Kethera," he said over the calm, "I need you to run a full environmental analysis of this area. I think the creatures aren't indigenous to this planet. I think they're refugees from somewhere else, and they're trying to recreate their original ecosystem." As the doctor's scanners worked, the lead creature approached Marcus slowly, its movements careful and deliberate. Up close, he could see that its armor was actually a complex biological system designed to process and neutralize environmental toxins. What appeared to be weapons were actually sophisticated biological filters. "Remarkable," Dr. Kethera's voice came over the calm. "The environmental readings confirm your hypothesis. The creatures appear to be terraforming this area to match the atmospheric and biological conditions of their original homeworld. The toxins they produce are not weapons, they're atmospheric processors. Can we help them?" Marcus asked. "If we can provide them with suitable environmental conditions, it should be possible to establish coexistence protocols," the doctor replied. "However, it will require significant modifications to human colonial infrastructure." The creature in front of Marcus extended what looked like a stinger toward him. Instead of pulling back, he extended his hand to meet it. The contact was gentle, almost tentative, and he felt a final flood of images, possible futures where humans and the creatures worked together, sharing knowledge and building a better world for both species. "General Thaxmore," Marcus said over the calm, "I recommend we establish first contact protocols rather than military engagement. These beings aren't our enemies. They're potential allies who have been trapped in a misunderstanding that's cost lives on both sides." The silence that followed was long and tense. Finally, General Thaxmore's voice came over the calm. "All forces, stand down to diplomatic posture. Dr. Kethera, begin immediate analysis for coexistence protocols." "And, Marcus." "Yes, sir?" "Outstanding work. Your grandmother would be proud." As the sun set over Zirian Prime, Marcus sat in the alien landscape surrounded by creatures that had terrified the galaxy, sharing stories and concepts through mental connection that transcended species barriers. Around him, teams of xenobiologists and diplomats were beginning the complex work of establishing formal first contact. But, for Marcus, the most important moment had already passed, the moment when fear gave way to understanding, and two species took their first steps toward friendship instead of war. His grandmother's stories about Earth being more dangerous than most people realized had turned out to be true. But, the most important lesson wasn't about toxin resistance or survival skills. It was about the power of approaching the unknown with curiosity instead of fear, and the possibility of finding friends in the most unexpected places. The creatures, who called themselves the Keepers in the closest human translation, had found a new home.
And humanity had found its first truly alien friends. The galaxy would never be the same.